Imagine looking out your window one day and seeing something completely unexpected, an alien moving in next door. That's what happened to John, an ordinary man who loved his quiet life. He'd always lived in the same neighborhood, enjoyed his garden, and liked things to stay the same. But one day, everything changed. John noticed a new neighbor moving in, but she wasn't just any neighbor, she was different. Her name was Tani, and she wasn't from Earth. She had glowing skin that seemed to change colors, and her movements were so graceful it was almost like she was floating. Her furniture was strange too, with colors and textures John had never seen before. It was like her whole world was somehow alive. From the moment Tani arrived, John couldn't stop watching. There was something special about her, something that pulled him in. Even other people in the neighborhood noticed her unusual beauty and mystery. John was used to his simple, quiet life and didn't often get close to others. But with Tani next door, he started to feel curious and even a little excited. He had no idea his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. John was the kind of person who liked his life just as it was, simple and calm. He had lived in the same small house for years and kept to his own routine. Every morning, he'd wake up early, make a cup of coffee, and sit by his window to watch the sun rise. He didn't have much excitement in his life, but he didn't mind. In fact, he liked it that way. His neighborhood was quiet too. People mostly kept to themselves, just like he did. John didn't go out much or have many friends. He spent his days tending to his garden, reading old books, and going for walks around the block. To him, a good day was a peaceful day. He was content with his own company and never felt like he needed more. John's life had a rhythm, a comfortable predictability that he found comforting. Every day was like the one before, with no surprises, no big changes. And John thought it would always stay that way. He didn't know that soon his steady, quiet life would be shaken up in a way he never expected, by the arrival of someone, or rather, something entirely new. From the moment Tani moved in, John couldn't help but notice how different she was. She didn't look or act like anyone he'd ever seen. Her skin had a soft, glowing shimmer that changed colors, almost as if it was alive. Sometimes it would be a cool blue, other times a warm golden shade, depending on her mood. This made her look magical, like something out of a dream. John couldn't stop wondering about her. He noticed the way she moved, so smooth and graceful, as if she was gliding instead of walking. Everything about her was unusual and fascinating. Even her belongings were strange. Her furniture looked nothing like what he was used to. It was colorful and seemed to have a texture that shifted in the light. Her things looked like they had come from another world, adding to her mysterious aura. Each time he saw her, John felt more and more drawn to her. It wasn't just how she looked, but the way she made him feel. He couldn't explain it, but there was something magnetic about her, something that made him want to understand her. Her presence seemed to fill the air around her, making it feel alive and different. John tried not to stare, but he couldn't help it. He wasn't the only one who noticed either. Other neighbors would glance her way, whispering about her strange beauty. But unlike the others, John felt something deeper, a pull that was more than just curiosity. There was something about Tani that made him feel alive, awake, and excited, and that feeling only grew stronger every day. As the days went by, John found himself thinking about Tani more and more. She was unlike anyone he'd ever met, and he couldn't shake the feeling that there was so much more to her than what he could see. She intrigued him, and without realizing it, he started looking forward to glimpses of her, whether she was outside watering her strange plants or simply passing by. One day, to his surprise, Tani waved at him. John wasn't expecting this, but he felt his heart race a little. He waved back, trying to hide how nervous he was. After that, they exchanged small, friendly gestures whenever they saw each other. Soon, a silent connection grew between them. It was like they shared a secret, even though they had hardly spoken. Then one afternoon, As John was tending to his garden, he noticed Tini standing nearby, watching him with a warm, gentle smile. She walked over, and they began talking. Her voice was soft, with a musical quality that put him at ease. She told him a little about her world, a place so different from Earth that John could barely imagine it. Her planet, called Eliza, was filled with colours and creatures he couldn't even picture, and it had traditions that seemed strange yet beautiful. They laughed together as she tried to explain things that were completely new to him. And as they talked, John felt something he hadn't felt in a long time, a spark, a feeling of wonder. Tini's presence made him feel alive and curious, like he was seeing the world with fresh eyes. There was a warmth between them, an understanding, even though they came from completely different worlds. Over time, John realized that he wasn't just fascinated by Tini, he genuinely liked her. She had opened up a part of him he didn't know was there, a part that was ready for something new, something unexpected. And as their connection grew, he started to wonder if maybe, just maybe, she felt the same way too. As John's bond with Tini grew, he started noticing strange things happening around his home and in the neighborhood. It started out small, things he almost didn't pay attention to at first. He'd look outside and notice the flowers in his garden blooming more brightly than ever, their colors more vivid than he remembered. At first, he thought it was just a lucky season for his plants, but soon he realized it wasn't just his garden. Other plants around Tini's home were growing taller, fuller, and bursting with color. Then, more unusual things started happening. He'd see lights flickering at night, both inside his house and around the neighborhood. Sometimes they'd glow softly or pulse in a gentle rhythm, like they were alive. And it wasn't just the lights or plants. Small objects would occasionally shift, or he'd feel a light breeze in his home with no windows open. It felt like the world around him was changing. Curious, John decided to ask Tini if she knew anything about these strange happenings. She explained that her emotions had an effect on her surroundings. In her culture, emotions weren't just feelings inside. They affected the world around them. The plants, the lights, even the air itself could change depending on how she felt. It was a natural part of our people's lives, a connection between their hearts and the environment that John found both beautiful and mysterious. As they continued to grow closer, these effects became more intense. When Tini was happy or excited, flowers would bloom all around, colors would deepen, and the air felt warm and inviting. But if she was sad or anxious, he noticed the plants would droop slightly and a cool, soft wind would blow, even indoors. John was fascinated by this connection. It made him feel closer to Tini, as though he could see parts of her world through these changes. Her presence was bringing something magical into his life, something that felt alive in a way he couldn't explain. It was like her emotions were painting the world around her, and he was getting a front row seat to it all. As John's feelings for Tini grew, he could sense there was something deeper happening between them, something unspoken yet strong. It was as if they were slowly forming a bond that went beyond words. But there was also a certain tension he didn't understand, a feeling that something important was approaching. Then one day, Tini opened up to him about a part of her culture that explained it all. She called it the joining. In her world, this was a time when her people felt a strong, almost irresistible urge to bond with another. The joining wasn't just about emotions or attraction. It was a deep, physical, and emotional connection. It was something her people experienced as part of a cycle, a need that was woven into their very nature. John listened closely, a mixture of curiosity and nervousness filling him. He could tell this was something serious for Tini, something she felt deeply. She explained that the joining was a blend of both desire and instinct. During this time, our people felt a pull to connect, to find someone they trusted and cared for. And as she shared this with him, he realized she was talking about him. At first, John didn't know how to react. The idea of a joining sounded intense, maybe even a little overwhelming. But he could also feel the depth of her trust in him, and he knew she wouldn't be sharing this if it didn't mean something special. He felt honored that she saw him as someone important in her life, someone who could be part of this mysterious bond. Part of him was afraid of the unknown, of what joining with someone from another world might mean. But at the same time, he couldn't deny the connection he felt with her. It was like he was being pulled toward her, not just because she was different, but because he genuinely cared for her. She was no longer just an intriguing neighbor. She was someone he wanted to be close to, someone he wanted to understand. As he looked into her glowing, expressive eyes, he knew he was ready to face whatever this joining meant. He didn't have all the answers, but he felt a growing courage to let go of his fears and step into something entirely new, even if it took him far beyond the life he once knew. As John began to understand the idea of the joining, he realized that this bond with Tini would bring challenges he'd never faced before. They weren't just two people with different personalities, they were from completely different worlds. Their ways of thinking, feeling, and understanding life itself were worlds apart. Yet, despite these differences, John found himself wanting to bridge the gap. One of the biggest challenges was understanding these customs and values. In her culture, emotions were openly shared and even celebrated. They weren't hidden or held back like John had grown up learning. Her people believed that feelings were powerful, not just in shaping who they were, but in affecting their entire environment. They saw emotions as a kind of energy that flowed through them and their surroundings. This was very different from John's world, where feelings were often kept private or held in check. John realized that he'd have to open up in ways he wasn't used to. He'd have to share more of himself, to express what he felt, something he'd never found easy. And for Tini, understanding human customs was challenging too. The way people on Earth hid their feelings and avoided showing their emotions was strange to her. She couldn't understand why anyone would hold back something so natural. But for John, keeping his emotions private had always been his way of feeling secure, his way of staying in control. Over time, though, John began to see things from Tini's perspective. Her openness about her feelings made him feel safe to be himself. He started sharing more with her, little by little, and felt a new freedom he hadn't expected. It wasn't easy, but Tini's patience and acceptance made it possible. She never rushed him, but she always encouraged him to let go of his fears and be honest about what he felt. Through this, John realized that their differences didn't have to divide them. Instead, they could make their bond stronger. Each new thing they learned about each other brought them closer, helping them build a foundation of trust and acceptance. And as he adapted to her way of life, Tini also made an effort to understand his. She respected his need for space and privacy, even if it was different from what she knew. In time, John came to see that this relationship wasn't just about joining with someone from another world. It was about learning to see the world in a new way. With Tini, he was discovering a life that was both challenging and beautiful, a life that taught him the value of both difference and connection. And slowly, he realized he was ready to embrace these changes, trusting that their bond would carry them through whatever lay ahead. As John and Tini grew closer, the strange happenings around the neighborhoods started to intensify. What began as small, curious changes, like flowers blooming brightly and lights flickering, soon became impossible to ignore. The entire neighborhood seemed to be feeling the effects of Tini's presence, and it was becoming more obvious by the day. One evening, John looked out his window and noticed that Mrs. Peterson's cat was floating, yes, actually floating, near the bushes outside her home. It didn't seem frightened, just calmly hovering a few inches off the ground as if it were the most natural thing in the world. John blinked, not quite sure he was seeing it right, but the sight was undeniable. When Mrs. Peterson herself came outside and gasped at her floating pet, John knew he wasn't imagining things. Word quickly spread through the neighborhood about the strange events. Plants around Teni's house had grown wildly, turning vibrant colors that were far from ordinary. Tree branches seemed to twist and move as if they had a life of their own, bending toward Teni whenever she walked by. The lights in the street would brighten when she was near and dim once she passed, following her almost like they were alive. The other neighbors were baffled. Some were curious, while others whispered in concern. They didn't know what to make of these unusual events, and a few even started blaming that strange new woman for all the oddness. But despite the gossip and confusion, Teni remained calm, as if she understood these changes better than anyone else. One day, John asked her directly about it. She explained that the closer they became, the more her emotions were impacting the area around them. In her culture, strong feelings, especially those tied to the joining, could affect the natural world. It was almost like her heart was reaching out, blending with the energy of the world around them. These changes were a sign of the deep connection she felt and the bond they were forming. John realized that these strange occurrences weren't just random effects. They were a reflection of the bond between him and Teni. The very air, the plants, even the light itself was responding to their growing connection. For John, it was both fascinating and a little overwhelming. But he also knew that these changes were a part of Teni, a part of the unique, magical world she came from. Despite the unusual events and the talk among neighbors, John felt a sense of wonder and excitement. Life with Teni was unlike anything he had ever known, and while it was strange, it was also beautiful. He knew that, whatever challenges came, he was ready to face them with her by his side, even if it meant living in a world where cats could float and trees could dance. As John watched the changes happening around him, he realized something important. His life would never be the same. Every day with Teni was different, filled with surprises and a kind of magic he'd never imagined. And though it was strange, it was also the most alive he had ever felt. Being around her made him see the world in a new way, full of wonder, possibility, and even love. But love, especially with someone as unique as Teni, came with its own challenges. John had been cautious for most of his life, avoiding risks and keeping his world predictable. The idea of opening his heart to someone from another world was both thrilling and terrifying. He wondered what would happen if he truly gave in to these feelings. Could he let go of everything familiar, everything safe, and embrace a life that was completely new? One evening, as they stood together under the stars, Teni gently took his hand. She looked at him with eyes that seemed to hold the universe. In that quiet moment, she didn't need to say a word. John understood that she wanted him to be part of her life, to join her in a way that went beyond words and into something deeper. But he knew this meant stepping into her world, accepting not just her differences, but the unknown that came with them. John took a deep breath. He knew he had a choice to make. He could return to his safe, predictable life, where things were always calm and nothing ever changed. Or he could choose Teni, with all her mystery and magic, and step into a life that would be full of surprises, challenges, and possibilities he couldn't even imagine. After a moment of silence, John realized his decision. He looked at Teni and nodded, feeling a warmth in his heart that was stronger than any fear he'd ever known. He was ready to embrace this bond, this joining, and everything that came with it. Teni smiled, and he could see in her eyes that she understood. She knew he was choosing her, choosing love, even if it meant leaving behind the life he once knew. In that moment, John felt a peace he hadn't expected. His life was no longer about routines or staying safe. It was about sharing a journey with someone who had opened his heart in ways he never thought possible. And as they stood there together, John knew he had made the right choice. He was ready to face whatever the future held, as long as he was with her. The night of the joining arrived, and John felt a mix of excitement and nerves. He knew this moment would be unlike anything he'd ever experienced. Tini explained that this joining was more than just a ritual. It was a transformation, a merging of their lives and emotions. She told him that once they completed it, their bond would be deeper and more connected than he could imagine. As they stood together under the starlit sky, Tini reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and comforting, but there was also a strange energy between them, something that felt alive. John could feel his heartbeat quicken as Tini's shimmering skin seemed to glow even brighter, casting a gentle light around them. Slowly, he began to feel something stirring within him, a warmth that started in his chest and spread through his whole body. In that moment, John sensed that this was more than just an emotional connection. It was something physical and real. The air around them seemed to hum with energy, and he could feel Tini's emotions blending with his own, creating a sensation he'd never felt before. It was as if they were becoming a part of each other, their thoughts and feelings merging in a way that felt completely natural. As the joining continued, John felt himself changing. He felt a new awareness, as if he could sense things he'd never noticed before. He could feel the faint movements of the plants nearby, hear the soft hum of the air, and sense the life around him in a way that was both strange and beautiful. Tini had told him that this transformation would connect him to her world, to the energies and rhythms of life that she knew so well. And now he understood what she meant. With Tini by his side, he felt a deep sense of peace and belonging, like he had found his true place in the world. He realized that this bond wasn't just about love. It was about growing together, changing together, and becoming something new. The world around him felt more alive, more vibrant, as if he was seeing it through Tini's eyes. And he knew that, from this moment on, his life would be forever linked to hers. As the night grew quiet, John looked at Tini and smiled, feeling a calm certainty in his heart. He had found something precious, something he didn't even know he was searching for. And as they stood together in their new bond, he knew that their journey was just beginning, a journey of love, transformation, and discovery. From that moment on, John's life was forever changed. The joining had transformed him, connecting him not just to Tini, but to a world beyond his own. Every day felt alive in a way he'd never experienced, filled with a sense of wonder that came from sharing his life with someone so unique. John had found a love that broke through the boundaries of anything he'd known, blending two worlds into one. Living with Tini brought new adventures and challenges, yet each one only strengthened their bond. Together, they navigated the mysteries of their shared lives, embracing the beauty of both Earth and the incredible world Tini came from. And through their connection, John grew to understand things he once thought impossible, how emotions could shape the world, how love could be a force that defied logic, and how opening his heart could unlock endless possibilities. The neighborhood, too, learned to accept Tini's presence, even if it took time. The strange phenomena became a part of life, adding a touch of magic to their once ordinary surroundings. And while some neighbors still looked on with a sense of curiosity, others came to see the beauty in the changes Tini brought. John and Tini had created something new, a life that bridged two worlds and changed everyone around them in small, surprising ways. As the years passed, John knew that he and Tini were building a legacy together, one that was both rare and precious. They had become a true partnership, blending two souls, two worlds, and two ways of life into something greater. And in their journey, they discovered that love could break barriers, creating a bond that would live on, inspiring those around them to see beyond differences and embrace the unknown. In the end, John had found what he hadn't known he was missing, a life filled with purpose, love, and the thrill of exploring the unfamiliar. With Tini by his side, he was no longer just an ordinary man living a quiet life. Together, they had created a story of connection and transformation, a story that would be remembered as a legacy of love that reached beyond the stars.